excited to have you all with us today. Ellen's filling in for Renee. She couldn't be with us today, and I know she's going to miss this one. This is one of our favorite shows. It's a creepy show from the woods today, so we're
Talking
excited.
about spooky things in your woods, right?
Yes, we've got two of our guests that have been on before. Our resident entomologist, Dr. Jonathan Larson. He's going to be talking about creepy things that we might find in the forest. And we also have Luke Dodd, Dr. Luke Dodd from the EKU, Eastern Kentucky University. He's going to be talking about bats and folklore. Also, he does some interesting tours down there at Eastern that we might learn about as well. So we're excited to have both our guests on. They're really awesome, dynamic speakers, and I'm really looking forward to their presentations, Ellen.
Yeah, we're so happy to have both of them. And, I think this is a time of year when everyone's thinking about these spooky things, the bats, the spiders. But these folks think about them all the time and are going to give us some, extra special insight into them.
Yeah, well, let's not wait any longer. Let's go ahead and ask Dr. Larson to join us if we can. Welcome.
Welcome.
Very excited to be here to talk about bugs again.
We love having you.
I love the spooky times, and I was trying to think up a new topic. I think I've done leeches before. I've done spiders.
I remember
before.
that.
Yeah. So this time around, I went with true bugs, and we'll talk about what that means. They are, I think, in a way, some of the most horrifying insects. Like if you kind of look at their biology. And we have an extra spicy one kind of mixed in that presents a unique angle on horror, perhaps. So is it cool if I just start running with it?
Take
it away.
Okay. All right. So when we're talking about insects, you will hear the term true bug pop up sometimes. True bugs are very interesting insects. I have titled this Terrifying and Beneficial because they are kind of weird, but many of them do present kind of a beneficial angle. And I always love promoting insects and their benefits to humanity. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But we also have to be honest and admit that some of them are serious pests that we have to try and do something about. There we go. So when we talk about this, I want to start with a linguistics lesson. You've heard me use the phrase true bugs now a couple times. This is sort of a special piece of etymology within entomology. All bugs are insects, but not all insects are bugs. The underlying theme here is that bug is actually a very specific term within entomology, and all bugs are insects, but insects is a more proper term if you want to talk about bugs, beetles, flies, and butterflies, things like that, if you want to include all of the insects. It's a bit pedantic, but it's an important thing. It's got an interesting history as well. The term bug is of kind of Middle English origin. It was originally used to describe various kind of creepy deepy things like bogies or bogeymen, like you see in the closet here, hobgoblins and various goblins, as well as scarecrows. These were bugs or bogues, and they were things to be kind of feared. And then around the late 16th century, the term bug became more predominantly used to refer to pest insects, things that were feeding on crops, so particularly pestiferous things. By the late 1800s, this term bug had become applied in the scientific community to a group of insects that we call the true bugs, which are represented in the order Hemiptera. So this order is a classification of insects. We have the true bugs. We have the moths and butterflies. That's another order. We have the beetles. With this one, the order name Hemiptera, we'll go through what that means here in a second. It includes all of these different bugs that you see here. So chorid bugs, plant bugs, bed bugs, stink bugs, bat bugs, all of these different things that are out in the world. And you'll notice there are some similarities in their kind of design. Hemiptera means half wing. This used to refer to the fact that this group as a whole, they had half leathery and then half membranous wings. So the top part is usually kind of tough and you can't see through it, while the back half of the wings will be more of a see-through situation. You can see all the veins in there. In about 20 years in the past, they combined another group of insects in with the Hemiptera. So the half wing doesn't necessarily hold true for every hemipteran, for every true bug anymore. But one thing that does stand out for all of them are their mouths. They all have piercing, sucking mouth parts. And you can see that beak on the front of this plant bug here that's kind of sticking out. I have some closer looks at this in these diagrams here. These piercing, sucking mouth parts are just highly evolved, highly modified chewing mouths that the insects normally have. Most insects, they chew their food with two large mandibles that kind of oppose each other, and they chew up leafy material or fruit pulp or other insects with that and swallow it down. It's something that we can easily sort of conceive of because we will consume our food in a very similar fashion. But with these highly modified mouths that we see on the true bugs, all of the same anatomical structures are present. So they have all of the same bits, the labrum, maxilla, labium, the hypopharynx, they're all there. They're just much more streamlined. And the same is true of their mandibles. They still have teeth when they have these piercing, sucking mouth parts. They're just much smaller, they're hidden, and they're going to be at the tip of this needle that they use to feed. And it will sort of cut into whatever they want to feed on, and it allows them to insert the piercing, sucking piece and then start to slurp up stuff. So these can be used on plants or they can be used on other animals. True bugs are a mix of pest insects, such as this aphid that you see here that feed on plants. So they're going to stick this into the stem, into the leaf, into the fruit occasionally, and they're going to suck sugary juices out in order to get their nutrition. Some true bugs are parasitic insects. We'll talk more about that here in a moment. The biggest example in our modern world is the bed bug. This is a ectoparasite that often ends up on humans. They use their piercing, sucking mouth part to bypass our skin, get into our blood vessels, and start drinking human juice out instead of the plant juice that we see with a lot of the other ones. There are some modified versions of the bed bug that feed on different animals. We've got swallow bugs. We've got bat bugs, which may pop up with our bat friend here in a moment, but they're feeding on that blood in order to gain nutrition. But the mouth part is basically the same. We also have in this group a variety of assassin bugs. These are predatory insects that use this piercing, sucking mouth part in order to attack other bugs and slurp their juices out. I think that when you talk about these kinds of mouths, there are some horror analogs, some horror parallels that pop up. Of course, if you're talking about a blood-feeding ectoparasite like a bed bug, you can't help but think of vampires. The fact that they kind of plunge their mouth into us and fill up with blood like we see in the animated GIF on the left. I mean, you can't help but think of Dracula and his kin when that kind of thing comes up. Sci-fi insects also frequently have piercing, sucking mouth parts. You can see one on this brain bug from the film Starship Troopers. I didn't use the animated version of this because it's pretty gross. I wanted to keep it PG, maybe PG-13 for From the Woods Today. But he's going to shove that into that guy's head and drink his brains, and then he knows what he knows. In the movie, the humans are fighting these insects, and that's how they gain intelligence from us, by spying on our brains, by eating them. So these are the things that kind of freak people out about these mouth parts. I do think that they're kind of strange, just the way that they get inside of things and feed on their juices. And some of them, unfortunately, they do bother us. I already talked about bed bugs. It'd be really weird if you encountered bed bugs out in the woods. I'd have a lot of questions about, what had happened in that spot before you got there. The big blood feeding ectoparasite that we deal with in the woods of Kentucky, that's a true bug, is called the eastern blood sucking cone nose, which is a long name for a very interesting kissing bug. This is our local kissing bug. Some people have heard of the term kissing bug. We'll talk more about it in a second, but this is the cone nose here. They have a very interesting red and black pattern on their body. They do have a large piercing, sucking mouth part. You can see it engaged in a mammal here that it's feeding on. They do take blood meals from humans. They'll also feed on frogs, rats, raccoons, cats, dogs, lots of other animals that they'll try and do this to, typically in the night, again, eliciting kind of that vampiric comparison. The reason that kissing bugs are famous is that they're known in South America, Central and South America, for their association with a disease called Chagas disease. You may have heard of Chagas disease. It's also called trypanosomiasis. This is an illness that is passed by these insects. It's vectored by them. It can be spread in other ways, particularly from mother to child. But the most common method is when these kissing bugs feed on a person. This is a problem in Central and South America. Up to 8 million people may be infected. They may end up suffering from chronic issues. So in the acute phase, immediately after the bite, the most famous thing that happens is called the Romanes sign, where your eyelid will swell shut on one side of your face. And then you go to the doctor because you maybe have this swelling and you have fevers and a rash. But then other people, they won't experience any of that, and they may not go to the doctor and get treated. And then you end up with a chronic phase of this, where you have colon enlargement, gastrointestinal issues. There can be cardiac issues like arrhythmias and cardiac arrest as a result of Chagas disease. It's truly a very serious issue down in these more southern countries. But despite having kissing bugs here in the United States, we do not have the same number of Chagas cases that we see down further south. So we have this kissing bug, the cone nose, that lives in Kentucky, yet we don't really have Chagas cases here. There are people that return from travel abroad that have Chagas, that maybe had it before they moved here, but we do not see local vectoring of this. And part of the reason for this is behavioral. We try to teach people about this. They fear if they find a cone nose in their home that they need to go and get treated for Chagas. It's very, very unlikely that you do, because when our kissing bug bites us, it will take a blood meal from near your mouth, which is the typical way that they feed in the kissing bug group. That's how they get their name. But then the cone nose moves away, goes elsewhere and digests its food and defecates. Whereas with the more southern species, there's a behavioral change where they stay on the face, they feed, then they defecate on you. And when you wake up, you will wipe their feces into the wound that they've created, thereby vectoring the Chagas into your body. So we don't see that here. Chagas has popped up in cone noses here, but we have not seen the next step, the actual vectoring of the disease. So most of the time when you find this, you don't need to freak out too much. Of course, we don't want blood-feeding ectoparasites in our home. People bring these to us. I had a jar of them left on our front desk recently with no note or anything. It seemed vaguely like a threat. But when people find these, they want to do something about it. Basically, it boils down to pest proofing. You have to seal up your windows. You have to find if there's an animal living in your attic or in your wall voids. Usually what happens is that somebody that has cone noses, they have an unknown raccoon infestation in their home or near their home. And once you get rid of those wild animals, then the cone noses will also go away. They do also fly to lights at night. So if you turn your lights off outdoors or switch to more of an insect-proof light bulb that has a different wavelength of light, then you will see less reduction of these to your building. But they are very common in folks that for folks that live near the woods. They're going to be more common for them than folks that live in cities and towns. There are some lookalikes. There's the seed bugs that we see down here, the brown marmorated stink bug in the lower right, and then the wheel bug, which is in the upper right, which is actually my next insect I wanted to talk about. These are pretty cool. They're large predators. They dwell in trees. They look for prey items that are living in the tree with them. They're named for this kind of cog-like wheel on top of their thorax, which you can see here with these spines. Other people have referred to it, and when I've held or captured these and showed them to people, they think it looks like a mohawk or like a Spartan helmet. So there are other sort of things that this evokes. You again can see the beak on the front. This is the large piercing sucking mouth part that they use as an assassin bug. They're about 1.5 inches long. They're kind of a mottled gray and brown color. Often are going to have red colored, orange colored antenna and the bottom parts of their legs. They're considered a shy insect. They don't necessarily want to engage with humans. They will often live on the undersides of leaves and avoid contact with larger animals. They can be found. You shouldn't handle them. They will bite you with that beak, and they will inject their digestive fluid into you, and you usually end up with a small divot at the bite wound, and that might not heal, it might not recover, and it's supposed to hurt really, really bad when they shove that into you. It's like a little pencil lead going into your skin. But we do like them. We try to conserve them because they'll feed on almost anything that they can stab, and that includes a lot of pest caterpillars like you see in the image on the right here. And famously, they'll feed on Japanese beetles. They'll find the beetles living in the trees with them, and they will shove their beak in the back of them. And what they do is they just suck all of the innards out of these insects. They just digest them through that beak. It's pretty amazing. The one sort of caveat here is that they don't just specialize on pests. They will eat anything, including honeybees and ladybugs that they can shove that beak into. So it's not only eating bad bugs, but they do provide that kind of economic service, environmental service that we enjoy. Those are two interesting ones that we have in the state that are native to the state. The final one that I'm throwing in today, I actually think that this is the first public verification of this. in any way, shape, or form. We have recently confirmed with the USDA, the Department of Ag, that Kentucky has its first infestation of spotted lanternfly. I think I've been on this show a couple of times talking about this invasive pest. I know that I've traveled the state and talked quite a bit about it. It's been public enemy number one for us for a few years, trying to make sure that it doesn't show up here. But unfortunately, it's slipped into the borders. The press release should be going out at this very moment. So that's why I feel comfortable talking about it here on the show. But we are trying to spread awareness that this has unfortunately come to roost in the bluegrass. The reason we're worried about it is it does feed on over 70 different host species. Maple trees are one of the primary hosts for it. We also see it on walnut, tulip tree, birch, roses, different white pines. It'll feed on all of these. It'll also attack willow trees, lots of different things that it'll make its home on. They prefer to agriculturally to feed on grapes. Grapes are the largest ag commodity under threat by this pest. Vineyards could lose vines to the spotted lanternfly. It's not going to attack corn or soybeans or anything like that. It's not going to wipe out the forest, but it is going to stress trees out. It's not going to cause reductions in wood prices or anything like that. It's just really kind of an annoying pest. It moves into areas and it just seems to take over, and it ruins people's enjoyment of the outdoors. Their most favorite tree is the tree of heaven. They preferentially feed on that at the end of their nymphal life cycle, and they want to feed on it as an adult. They do better when they feed on this tree. These invasive trees are a problem on their own, but they also facilitate the spotted lanternfly. So be on the lookout for things like large insects feeding on a tree, causing this oozing that you see here. They also cause yellowing of the leaves. You'll see them. They're very obvious at this time of the year as adults. If you go out on your property and you see a tree that has an over inch long insect with spots and stripes on its top wings, it's kind of a pinkish khaki color. Take a picture, please, and send it to reportapest@uky.edu. We're desperately trying to make sure that we know where this is in the state. So this is their piercing, sucking mouth part. They use it to feed first on the younger plant growth, but then as they age, they're able to stab it into the more woody tissue. So they move down to the trunk. You can see it sort of extended and stabbed into the tree. And then as they feed, they suck out that sap. They produce a lot of honeydew. The honeydew drips off and then creates opportunities for black sooty mold in the area as well. So we're very upset about this. This is over in Gallatin County on the border with Indiana. That's where we have had the first discovery. This is something that we're going to be talking a lot about here in the next coming weeks and months. We are also warning people that go to the Cincinnati area that it is expanding in Cincinnati. And so if you travel there, you could accidentally transport it back. But I think that's a creepy one. Invasive species are no good news usually. So I wanted to include it in my creepy update here today.
Well, thank you so much. And, I also did not want to see this creepy new invader in our state. As gross as bed bugs are, and as gross as some of those other sucking bugs are, unfortunately, we're all probably going to get pretty familiar with a new one in the near future in spotted lanternfly.
Absolutely. Look for it in your backyard and help us keep track of it.
So, Dr. Larson, you just kind of earned a permanent spot on the show, it seems like, for a while now. Yeah, this is going to be certainly something we're going to have to deal with and address for a while. Yeah, I loved your presentation, and then you dropped a big haymaker there at the end.
Just the people's elbow right on top of it.
That was a bit off the top rope there.
And if you're watching the show, this is why you got to watch From the Woods Today.
I know, an exclusive breaking news.
Exclusive with Dr. Jonathan Larson.
I'm afraid
You've heard it here first.
The press release people will be mad at me. I hope they've put it out already.
Yeah, I'm sure they have. So, well, everybody will be talking about it real soon. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of calls about it as well, Dr. Larson.
But let's get back on the creepy train, the Halloween train.
Well, that's pretty creepy, but yeah.
But let's have happy Halloween stuff.
Yeah, here we go.
With our next guest.
Like bed bugs, gosh, which I am also truly terrified of and look for in every hotel room I stay in.
That's good. That's a good attitude to have. You got to check for them. If you don't check for them, that's how you get them.
And then bring them back home when that's not good. So, oh. All right, Dr. Larson, I think we may hear from you a little bit later as well. I think we're going to try to bring you back for a little round robin with our next guest, Dr. Luke Dodd from Eastern Kentucky University. Luke, how are you, sir?
Hey, I'm good. Can you all hear me okay?
Hear you well.
All right. Thank you all so much for having me. Yeah. My name is Luke Dodd. I'm one of the wildlife professors at Eastern Kentucky University, and I'm a mammologist. I study bats. That's really how I got started within the wildlife field. You know, I do a lot of work with a variety of other non-game species, but bats have always kind of been my jam. And also horror and spooky stuff. It's also kind of my jam. I've really just always had an infatuation with the scary stuff. And yeah, so I have a handful of slides here. I think this will be a far more casual set of slides to work through, but hopefully there'll be plenty of time for questions too.
Excellent. Well, we're glad to have you. Appreciate it. And I know it's got to be an exciting time for you since, you know.
Oh yeah, it's great. This is my favorite time of the year. I take the bucket of candy to the classroom. Even in college, you guys still get candy for Halloween.
There you
And we'll do our classwork and then hopefully tell some spooky stories too. So do you want me to go ahead and start sharing?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's see what you got. Looking forward to it.
All right, let me see here. All right, can you guys see that okay?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Okay, so the topic that I want to just share a little bit of information about here is really what I would say is just, you know, the role that that bats play within myth and folklore. I think people all over the world have an infatuation with bats. A lot of folks might think that bats are gross or icky or repulsive. You know, they have this association with the occult and with the spookier times of the year, but I'm here to argue that bats are cool on a lot of fronts. And I think it's really interesting to think about the reasons why that bats are what they are. You know, so I guess to kind of open things up, I would just first make a statement, and I've tried to include some references here in my slides. So if anybody's interested in this, feel free to snap a picture of the reference there, and maybe you can track down a little bit more information yourself. This is just a reference to an image that I think is pretty evocative. But as we move along, there's going to be some other little bits on the slides that you might want to check out. But, you know, bats are what we would call liminal beings. You know, there's all different types of liminal beings that are out there. This is kind of a myth and like folklore type of term, but think about like, say, a centaur, which is, of course, a man welded to a horse, or a chimera or a griffin, any of these mythical beasts where it's mixing of a couple different types of life together. That's disconcerting to people generally. And bats are exactly that. You know, they are flying mammals, which means they don't look like most other mammals. They do things that other mammals don't do. They live in places that we tend to associate with the underworld, and so because of that, they kind of occupy a cool space. And that's part of the reason why they have, you know, such spooky linkages. Okay, so let's see. All right, so there's lots of ways that we can kind of approach talking about bats as mythical symbols. One of the things to kind of start off with here is, you know, to recognize that humans have been thinking about bats for a very long time. And there's a linkage of bats and that sort of archetype even within the deities and the pantheons of gods that we can see all across the world. So, you know, think about Mesoamerican cultures. There's a variety of Mayan groups that had a being that was known as Camazotz. You know, perhaps it was one of the gods within the pantheon. Maybe it was just an evil or ill spirit that was related to death and the underworld. That kind of gets at the linkage of bats with hell or with the underworld, right? We tend to associate bats with caves, and a lot of our bats here in Kentucky actually do use caves for at least a portion of the year. But that descent into the underworld on a daily basis to go to sleep and to go into torpor every day, and then emerge at night during the dark side of the diurnal cycle, and then in the winter to go into the caves, and then to kind of be reincarnated into the spring. You know, those are associations with death in the underworld, right? So we can think about darkness, nocturnality, you know, being active at night, the underworld, all of these things just really hardwire bats to be these symbols for the darker side of things. And, you know, they even have some associations with bloodletting and sacrifice within some of these Central American and Mesoamerican cultures, you know, over the years. I don't have a slide in here. I'll go ahead and jump to the next slide here of bats as tricksters, but I should have added one more slide to my slide series here and titled it Bats as Luck, because, you know, I talked about just here a slide dealing with Mesoamerica and the role of bats there, but bats are a huge cultural touchstone within Asian culture, and specifically Chinese culture. And so, you know, thinking about the role there, you know, in some instances in Asian cultures, bats are actually a symbol of good luck. And so you can see that kind of iconography. It's not always dreary and spooky and of the underworld. Maybe the bat is a source of good luck. But another type of way that we can think about bats and how they kind of play into our psyches is oftentimes bats are seen as tricksters. So a lot of our American Indian cultures here in North America have folklore and folktales associating bats with a kind of a trickster lifestyle. Like, how did the bat get its wings? How did the bat learn to fly? You know, there's a variety of different stories and parables that kind of spell that out. But shape-shifting is really a common element within these types of trickster myths. And bats really are shapeshifters. They're mammals, but they fly. They have those wings. That's not normal. Again, they're liminal and they're crossing boundaries. So they're breaking archetypal rules. They're doing things differently than what we think about. And that can be a little bit jarring to us. Okay. But thinking about, let's see here. I'm going to jump over to another slide. You know, some of the more spooky things that we associate with Halloween, you know, bats have this long-standing association with witchcraft and with witches. So like here's a few lines from Macbeth. We get the classic eye of a newt, toe of a frog, wool of a bat, tongue of a dog, all of the things that get mixed up into the witch's cauldron. You know, that's something that Shakespeare wrote. You know, today, much of the folklore that we associate with vampires kind of writ large really comes down to this book, Dracula, that no doubt many people have heard of, and hopefully a lot of people have read. I think it's a very easy read for when it came out and what it's about. It's one of my favorite books. I've read it many times, but Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, and he's really one of the main people that was responsible for welding in the symbol of the bat with the vampire, right? And like here's a little bit from one of the diary entries that's found within Dracula. Like Dracula is written in what we would call an epistolary structure, where each chapter is a different portion of somebody's diary entry, or maybe it's a snippet of a newspaper. And in this case, we have Dr. Seward, who's one of the main characters within Dracula, basically making the observations that as Lucy's room became illuminated with moonlight, there was a great bat that was wheeling around and striking up against the window trying to get in. And you know, so the bat, garlic, the use of silver, all of those things that we associate with vampires, a lot of it's in large part due to Bram Stoker, because he was somebody that sort of pulled like a lot of these folkloric elements all together in one story that we all recognize. Okay, but I would also argue, I love the spooky nature of bats. I think they're awesome on that front, but I'm a mammologist, I'm a conservationist, and I would really like people to just hopefully recognize that bats aren't so spooky. They're awesome. on so many different levels. You know, within the order Chiroptera, so bats are a type of mammal and they occupy what's called the taxonomic order. So just like there's the order Rodentia, which are all of the different rodents that are found all across the world, mammals have another group that are called Chiroptera, and that's the bats. And so rodents are the most diverse group of mammals that we have all across the globe. But second to that are the bats. There's around 1,400 species, I believe, found all around the globe. And bats are pretty cosmopolitan in their distribution. Really, the only places where you're not going to find bats are those areas that are extremely cold or extremely isolated oceanic islands. And why is that? Well, you can't fly out there, so you can't colonize it, right? You can't get out there. And so in those instances, you might see an absence of bats. But outside of that, bats are really found all over. And bats are cool on just a lot of fronts. They fly, which makes them unique within the mammal world. So they have entire suites of different adaptations that make that possible. But, you know, one of the things that bats here in Kentucky and any bats that tend to be found in more temperate latitudes have to do is they got to conserve energy. If you are a little mammal that's flying around the night skies, that costs an incredible amount of energy. And so because of that, bats are pretty savvy. So over evolutionary time, they've made use of what we would call torpor, which is shifts in their metabolic processes on a daily basis. So rather than just going to sleep during the day, they actually ramp down their metabolism to pretty low levels on a daily basis. And then they come back out of that at night to come out and forage. And then, of course, in the winter months, when there's nothing for bats to eat, they go into hibernation. And that's something that's variable across species. Not all bats hibernate, but at least the bats in Kentucky do, because it gets cold in the winter. And maybe some of them are even gonna migrate a little bit too. So, you know, given those nocturnal habitats or habits that bats occupy, you know, they also use echolocation, which is a really fascinating trait as well. And you know, we really should be proud and I would say thankful for all of the great things that bats do for us. You know, even if bats didn't have any dollars and cents benefits to us, I would still argue that bats are awesome and deserve our attention. But this is a species group that it's actually pretty easy to put some dollar and cents values on, right? They provide a lot of what we would call ecosystem services. So I just have two quick summary infographics here from a couple scientific papers. The one on the left is an incredibly well-known and highly cited paper that came out over a decade ago. And this paper was published in Science, and Boyles et al. Basically did an entire across the United States estimate of the ecosystem services in terms of dollars per acre sort of benefit that bats provide. And it is incredible. You know, the overall values that bats are providing all across the United States, you know, the values that are expressed there are in per $1,000 per county. So county by county, this research group were estimating the economic benefits of bats. And of course, this type of approach was really focusing on agriculture and agricultural lands. But, you know, more recently and kind of contemporaneously with a lot of this ag-focused research with bats, people have been looking at all of the various ways that we know that insects are controlled by bats. And so the study that's shown here on the right by Bielke and O'Keefe from 2022 it's a really savvy exclusion experiment where they basically were building cages, and I think the cages were around 6 or 7 meters square and all sizes, and they put these cages out, I think in southern Indiana, in a forest, like a state forest, and they replicated the cage measurements where they were looking at growth of vegetation inside the cages and as well as in some controls adjacent outside of the cages. And the cool thing is that they were using these cages to just exclude bats at night. So they removed the cages during the daylight hours to let the birds in and all that kind of thing. And then every evening they enclosed the vegetation within the forest, and they measured the amount of herbivory or the amount of vegetation eaten by insects. And it's striking. There's an order of magnitude difference between the overall herbivory or vegetation eaten in the control versus the bat exclusion experiment. And the take-home message here is that for a lot of our really important tree species like oaks and hickories, bats do a really measurable and important role of controlling the insects that are eating those tree species that we care about. So it's more than just things like corn and soybeans. It's all across our forest systems. Okay, and here in Kentucky, you know, we have around 15 species of bats. I say around 15 because depending on the time of the year, some of our bats migrate, they move in and out, depending on the time of the year. And of course, we have that thing called climate change, which is shaping all of our various communities of plants and animals all across the globe. And we are seeing shifts in the distribution of bat species. There's at least a handful of papers that I'm aware of that are reporting differences and shifts where more southernly distributed bat species are making their way into Kentucky. So we have a variety of bats here in the state. I have an arrow pointed at one of them, the Rafinesque's big-eared bat. I'm going to use that a little bit as a segue to move over to talk about a cool or at least interesting scientist that is well known here in the state of Kentucky. So Rafinesque's big-eared bat is not was not named by Constantine Rafinesque, but was named after. Okay, so folks may be familiar with this figure, but Constantine Rafinesque is one of our most notable naturalists that resided here in Kentucky. This is someone that came to the States in the early 1800s, and Rafinesque had a strong presence, not just in Kentucky, but also in Ohio. Okay, and Rafinesque is really known best as a botanist, but really he was at this point in time what we would call a naturalist and somebody that was very interested in the naming of things and just understanding the natural world. At this state, at this point in time, a lot of our wildlife biology and a lot of our broader biology was just describing what was around us because we didn't quite know everything yet. But Rafinesque was certainly one of those people that we would call a splitter, which is to say he liked to name things. He liked to put his name on things. He liked to be the person responsible for that. He was all about naming things. So in fact, he named more than 2,700 genera, or that's genus level, 2,700 different genera. That's more than Carolus Linnaeus, who's the godfather of taxonomy. But as this JSTOR article here states, you know, only 50 or 60 of Rafinesque's genera are recognized today. He really liked to name things. He wanted to see lots of differences where they were, but in actuality, he was probably a little bit of someone that was inclined to exaggerate things, right? And personally, he probably wasn't the nicest person and the easiest one to get along with. So, you know, we have here in the bluegrass, Transylvania University, right? And so Transylvania University is one of these incredibly old institutions, one of these incredibly old colleges and universities that we have here in the United States. I believe it's the first university that was established on the west side of the mountains, the Appalachians or the Alleghenies anyway. And Rafinesque actually was part of the faculty there at Transy from some number of years, from 1819 to 1826, but he didn't get along great with Horace Hawley, who was the president of Transy at the time. And you can read a ton of different types of stories about this, lots of accounts. There's lots of saucy accounts that are out there about this. So I would encourage you to be conscientious about what you're reading. If you're reading something that seems a little bit extraordinary, maybe temper it with a history book too. But it's all in good fun, you know, to get this kind of information, you know. So one of the books that I have in my collection of spooky bluegrass books is called Haunted Kentucky. And like, here's one of the statements, you know, after Rafinesque was essentially fired from Transylvania University. There's this statement. So this is taken verbatim from this book here that's shown on the left. But according to the legend, when Hawley informed Rafinesque that he was being fired, the botanist exclaimed, "Curse thee and thy school as I place curses on you." And the power of the curse became evident just a few days after Rafinesque's departure, when the administration building, Morrison Hall, burned down. And then Hawley, the president of Transylvania University, died of yellow fever 7 years thereafter when Raff cursed the university. And since then, there's been a curse every 7 years, right? And so there's this cool tradition at Transylvania University of Rafinesque's curse. You can see here, this is an image from the Herald Leader that shows some students of Transy back in 1976 preparing to spend the night in Rafinesque's tomb. If you've ever been to Transy's campus and you've looked, up towards that main building with the big stairs there, that's supposedly where Rafinesque is buried. So the story in terms of Rafinesque's death is that he did die in Philadelphia in 1840, and then he was buried in a cemetery there. But later, Friends of Transylvania University excavated the gravesite and then reinterred his remains at Transy. Okay, and then the thing that's interesting is actually the remains that were brought to Transy's campus and that I think were moved, weren't even Rafinesque's in actuality. I think it's known that at this point it was a woman named Mary Passamore. It was one of these cemetery or burial sites where you would have a lot of people all buried in the same place. So the remains that were recovered and removed and brought over to Transy were not Rafinesque's, but it is a cool story nonetheless. If you're interested in this type of history for the state of Kentucky, there is this book that's called the Kentucky Encyclopedia, and John Kleber is the editor. It's out of print. It's been out of print for some number of years, but you can find it here and there at used bookshops, and it is it's a Bible. It's an encyclopedia. It is a huge tome that is just chock full of all different types of great stories and bits of information, both in terms of the natural world and the political world and the cultural world, all about our state. And I find it to be a really cool resource. So the quote that I'm giving here is coming from that Kentucky Encyclopedia. So I think that's it for my slides. Hopefully I did okay on time here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Nice, very interesting. I did not understand that story like that. Now, did they do anything with the tomb afterwards, right? Have they?
That I don't know. I'm not for sure what the situation is. I know that there's that the tradition of students that stay overnight on Halloween there at in Transy, and I think that's something that still carries on today. But honestly, I'm not totally familiar with the story of Passamore's remains and kind of what happened with those.
I also like the study you showed about how bats protect our oak trees and our hickory trees.
Oh yeah,
that was
Yep.
really interesting, and it's certainly we have to think about bats a lot when we're doing timber harvesting and other things here in the state. So another reason to try to be supportive of our bat population for sure.
Yeah, and there's a number of different studies. I made the remark that, kind of following that Boyles et al. Paper, people really started to try to demonstrate some of the what we would call top-down pressures that bats can demonstrate within our ecological system. So bats are the predators that eat the prey, and the prey are the things that are eating the plants, perhaps. So they're top-down regulation, right? So it's appropriate to say that there's been those types of studies going on even before that Boyles paper. There's papers like in the 06, 07, 08 in that era that were demonstrating the role that bats play in kind of herbivory of tropical forest systems. But really we're at this point over the past decade, there's been a variety of different types of studies that have looked at a variety of different types of systems, and we know that bats, they eat bugs real good. they eat, I should say, insects based on what John talked about here just a few slides ago. But bats eat insects. Not all bats are insectivores, but many of them, and here in North America, that's principally the job that they serve, ecologically speaking, and they are the focal predators of insects out in the nocturnal world.
So Dr. Dodd, I think we're going to ask Dr. Larson to join us again if he's still available. And it's striking how similar you all are as far as your storytelling abilities, right? You all are great storytellers. Not that you're making stuff up, but you just have a way of weaving a very interesting narrative on things that a lot of times people may be a little kind of about, right? So I mean, kudos to both of you all for being so good at what you do. We really appreciate it.
They train us well in the entomology department at the University of Kentucky.
Yep, it's notable that both John and I we were PhD students in the UK entomology department, and prior to that, I was a master's student in the forestry department. So I've known Billy for quite some time, dating back to my grad school days.
It's really interesting. Like I said, I really enjoyed both y'all. Now, one of the things we wanted to kind of ask you all about is because a lot of times when we think about horror movies and other things, we see that the woods are kind of the setting for a lot of this. So, I was wondering if you all had some thoughts on that. Why do we always kind of portray the woods as like this scary place?
I mean, I would say that just like on the very surface level, it's because they are scary. That's where the things are that want to eat you. That's where the very back of your brain, the basal part of your brain, like it knows that that's where the predators are. If you were a medieval peasant that joined the show today, welcome to the 21st century. But you also are aware that you get robbed in the woods, right? There's bandits that hide out there that will beat you, eat you, and rob you, hopefully in that order. I think that the woods sort of on their surface are scary. Luke has been enjoying one movie in particular this year, The Witch, which came out when? 2016?
I think that's about right. Maybe 2016 to 2018, somewhere in there.
Would you agree that it shows kind of like, I think, a unique American approach to why the woods are scary though? Like it feels like our country, like when it started getting colonized, like we had a very different fear of the woods than what was present more in Europe, where you have like the fairy tales and stuff where they come from.
Yeah, as you said, it very much was. It's primeval, right, John? And it is this like it's unknown and it's scary. Yeah, The Witch came out in 2015, so I guess I saw it in 2016 because it had like a small kind of indie release. But the woods, and it's a New England fairy tale, like or a New England folk tale. That's actually the subtitle of the movie. But the forest in that movie is very much it's a character in and of itself, right? That sounds a little bit trite to say sometimes when you're talking about literature, but it's true. Oftentimes the setting of the story is as important as the characters in the story, and the woods, this omnipresent, like dark thing that's just right outside your farmland. That's spooky. It gets dark at night, and I don't know. I mean, we've all spent lots of time outside, right? And even hiking around out in the woods. And I think it's always funny whenever you'll be talking or working with somebody, and they might make some sort of express something that, like, oh, I've never been lost in the woods, and two, I've never been scared out in the woods. I'm a soon to be 42-year-old man, and I've been both of those things. And I think it is absolutely like, if you have spent any level of time out in the woods, getting lost is a scary thing, because you don't know where you're at. You can't get back to the truck, right? You can't get your way out of there. That is that's unsettling, and the woods themselves are unsettling. So if you say you haven't been scared out in the woods, I would challenge you to go out and spend the night in the woods without a flashlight and without any earbuds, so you can just listen to all of those sounds that are a whole lot louder outside your tent.
Hey, no, we don't want to scare everybody.
No, this is a great Halloween plan. Go out in the woods. No flashlight.
This is not the official
Nothing.
position of
No,
from
for you
Wood
Enjoy
personally.
some bats, enjoy some bugs, be terrified.
I read a quote online actually that kind of taps into what Luke is saying. It was from an article in the Guardian a while back, and it says it was this professor from the United Kingdom, and he said it's a landscape of increasing disorientation. Like you go to the woods, if one thing goes wrong, the next thing goes wrong, and sometimes you lose your humanity along the way. I think that's the other thing.
Mhm.
We are afraid of the woods because we're afraid of what it will bring out in us. Like we will return to a more primal state. You may lose your humanity by choice or through tragedy. You think about the Evil Dead movies, you know, you get your body parts chopped off by various demonic forces that are out there. I think that we just view the woods kind of as this creepy pagan lurking thing sometimes here. And it's where we did a lot of atrocities in the United States. So we kind of maintain it as a creepy landscape, unfortunately.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I get
Yeah.
you.
And now you've got some
Forester,
movie
though, I care about.
recommendations
Yes,
for Halloween.
we've got The
to
Witch,
get
Evil
scared in the
Dead,
woods. Yeah.
Well,
Cabin in the Woods. Cap it off
yes,
with that.
yeah.
Cabin in the
No,
Woods. I recommend it.
yeah, get out and enjoy your woods. Don't be scared of them, really, seriously.
Yeah.
No, thank you both, gentlemen. Really appreciate your all's presentations. I mean, what you bring to the show and what you share with the audience across the state and the work that you all are doing. It is impactful, and thank you all. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Excellent, excellent. So, folks, we had really a awesome show. Dr. Crocker, I really enjoyed having both Luke and Jonathan on. They did such a good job, as they always do. It was very entertaining.
New things to terrify us, but also really exciting things about our woods. Because most of it, it's a little scary, a little gross, maybe. But also really fantastic. The part about bats and what they do for us in our woods, is always a really nice reminder. Yeah, they might be a little creepy, but we still love them.
Yes, yes, and they serve an important role. So, well, folks, we're going to wrap it up today. We thank you all for being with us. I hope you enjoyed our creepy show this year. Again, big thanks to Dr. Larson and Dr. Dodd. They did a great job. Dr. Crocker, thank you so much for co-hosting today on the show.
Thank you, Billy.
Renee will hopefully be back with us next week. But folks, let others know about the show. We want to try to be responsive. If there's things that you all are seeing out in your woods that you want to know a little bit more about, let us know, whether it's dealing with trees or wildlife or whatever. We want to be all about the woods here at From the Woods Today. So thanks much, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody next week at 11 o'clock.